So, shortly after I became aware of the disclosures from the UFO whistleblower David Grush, who was working in the UAP programs at a pretty high level. He wasn't boots on the ground. He didn't see any of these crafts, but he was in a managerial oversight role, and apparently he had multiple people coming telling him about some of the details of what people who were out there recovering these craft had experienced. Um, then I started hearing about a big thread on 4chan, which I decided to go track down. And luckily, some people have archived this so you can go through it. But supposedly, this is another member of these programs who is not currently involved, but he had involvement in these programs up to 2 years ago. He apparently has liver cancer at the moment, which is why he's on the internet posting some of his knowledge, but he is trying to maintain some anonymity by not answering some of the questions. This is a huge thread. There's a ton of really interesting information, and I just wanted to go through and talk about some of the stuff that I found particularly interesting. Just as a starter summary, he claims to have infinite knowledge of what the U.S. currently knows about UFOs minus the last 2 years. UFOs are primarily unmanned drones. They're built to spec each time they are deployed. UFOs are created by a mobile construction facility that hides in the ocean. Construction facility destroys anything that comes close to it and will disappear for days when approached aggressively. U.S. believes the facility has been active on Earth for at least 100 years, maybe much longer. And then let's get into the questions. So, is there a working theory on origins? If so, care to elaborate? His answer, quite a bit. We think the construction facility has been around since at least 4000 BC. See sightings/paintings from early eras in history. Has any form of intelligible communication been established? Yes, it also depends on your viewpoint. They mostly want very little to do with us until we start to talk about war and nuclear options. It's one of the reasons you see them so often in critical events. So, I've always thought that these small craft that we see floating around, there's no way that these are, used for deep space travel. So, having a mothership or something like this that that has arrived and is serving as kind of a home base for these craft makes a lot more sense. He also gets into the propulsion systems, and it explains why these craft are able to move in what we perceive to be unnatural ways. Because if they are using gravity or anti-gravity drives, which anti-gravity is likely what they're using, it would do multiple things. If you're in a dense gravity environment, it's the same gravity and acceleration are treated as the same force in physics. So if you're in a dense gravity environment or if you're traveling close to the speed of light, in both situations, time is going to pass more quickly for those who are observing you than you experience it in that gravity well. So just like in Interstellar, they go down to the planet's surface, they have a malfunction, and they get stuck on the planet for like 30 minutes. Well, that turns out to be like 20 something years for people who are in orbit. Meanwhile, it's only 30 minutes for them. So they get back up to the ship, and the person they left up on the ship in orbit is 30 years older, and it happened in the blink of an eye for them. So if this craft is moving 10 miles in a second, which the military has seen on radar, with the footage that was released, with Colonel Fravor, I think he's a colonel, the pilot that was flying when the weapons system was targeting that craft, and then it disappeared and showed up 10 miles away. The only way that would be possible is if there is time dilation, because otherwise the craft would probably tear itself apart and scramble any sort of biological pilots that are on board, just because of the acceleration. So the other explanation is that trip for them takes a minute or two to travel that far, which would be very doable. So for them, they're just flying around, and we just see it as like, man, they just teleported. The other thing that I find very fascinating is the fact that supposedly this is all being done by contractors, which is how this has been kept so secretive and compartmentalized and outside the oversight. All they need to do is swipe the money off the table, and so it's just a black money pool that is funding this, and then it's not even really being done by the government. And the other theory that I love is that if this is all contracted, then that means private sector companies most likely are in possession of this technology, and private sector companies are doing the reverse engineering. So if this stuff comes out and is finally released and able to be brought into the light of day, I think that you're going to see that there might be some companies out there that have some technology that they're not able to disclose. Lockheed Martin is one. Virgin Galactic also has, one of their executives was involved in the UAP program, and they were also on the Lockheed board. And some of the claims in this 4chan thread are that Lockheed has some of these vehicles. So we'll see if that proves out to be true. Do the UAPs return back to the manufacturer unit? Yes, some come in and leave the planet, but very rarely. Usually the same number that comes in goes out unless special circumstances arrive. It feels more like a carrier, but with construction capability. Someone asked, what's the purpose of the UAPs? Surveillance of humans? The U.S. believes they are not here to harm us. They only seem interested in us once they realize we are destroying things around us, including each other. One of the officials in charge said something that stuck with me. They act like keepers of a zoo, uninterested in the daily life of wildlife unless there's a problem. So that there's a recurring thread in here or theme in this thread where that keeps getting revisited, and it seems like if there's anomalous events going on, war, disease, like when COVID was out, apparently that was enough to prompt more sightings. So anytime something kind of out of the ordinary is going on, they start to become more visible. Do you know if the entities behind the UFOs are native to the Earth, like an older civilization, breakaway civilization, or a civilization of humans that escaped a previous cycle of cataclysm due to their advanced tech? His answer, limited expertise since my role is more craft analysis. U.S. believes they're foreign to our world. A previous cataclysm could make sense. They also show up in times of strife, such as natural events. So someone asked, how about the destination of the space orbs? Is Jupiter a potential destination? I believe they're keeping a massive orb inside the gas giant, though I have no evidence, but many dreams of it. His answer, no idea. If it is a project, I haven't seen it. No orbs out of the construction facility, just UFOs. Someone asked, what units have been lost approaching this construction machine? Why have they not sent a Seawolf to investigate? The Jimmy Carter with its nanotech. Everything you can think of. This is his answer. Everything you can think of, really. At one point, nuclear missiles were being toyed with again, and we deployed fighters and a sub with serious intent. Everything except the sub was lost. Another question, how have they come to the conclusion that the UAP being released are ET? If they don't know what the UAP are to begin with, Or if there's nothing inside them, it's a pretty big jump to go right to ET. His answer, they crash sometimes. Parts fail and gravity engines near the surface of the planet can be like crossing an intersection. We recover these and sometimes find passengers. We mostly see drones now. Back in the earlier days, we saw a lot more piloted craft. So, I mean, we don't know. There's people that theorize that the natural evolution of human beings, we already went through one pretty big jump where we became upright and our brain capacity drastically increased. So there's some people that think the grays are just where we're headed. We're going to continue to have a larger cranium and a smaller, weaker body as we become more cerebral and less physical. So that is one theory, is that it's dimensional or time based. It's people from another dimension, and you're getting bleed through. Humans potentially. It could be other entities. Who knows? So another question: the last unit we saw approach the facility didn't. So I guess they're quoting him. The last unit we saw approach the facility didn't even have time to communicate that they were being attacked before it was over. Any details on what happened? His answer: normal approach details pilot responsive and actively talking. The feed cuts out, pilot still talking, suddenly nothing. Poor guy likely had no idea it was a suicide mission. Based on what we've seen, the construction facility has far superior weapons than the UFOs do. The weapon destroys the matter it hits entirely. It also shits on anything electronic in the vicinity. So this mothership is supposedly located in the Bermuda Triangle. Now, obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, everyone's aware that there's been a lot of unexplained behavior, episodes in the Bermuda Triangle. Potentially, it at least ties in. We can't go so far as to say this explains it. We don't have proof in either regard. We don't have proof that these phenomenon are real. We also don't have physical proof that this mothership exists. But the two certainly fit together quite well. So the other thing that he's claiming is supposedly each craft, when it's released, is purpose-built. So they seem to, when they fly back home, they seem to get broken down, smelted, or I don't know what the process is, but somehow they get reduced back to the components that you would use to produce one of these UAPs. And so when one is deployed, it has a mission, and it's usually configured to support that mission. So if they're doing some sort of lab work or testing, then the craft will have some sort of lab and tools and equipment, and everything is supposedly stored very, there's nothing laying around. Everything, the craft has built-in storage for whatever's being placed on it when it leaves. And this can go all the way up to, they supposedly have seen or maybe captured something that they compared to a bus. So it was a passenger vehicle. It had multiple viewing stations, so there were a lot of windows or whatever they use, and it was just an observation craft from what they could tell. But obviously, we don't know anything. We're just kind of guessing. The other thing that he repeatedly says is that these people, while they're disinterested, while they're disinterested largely, they're also not very nice. And he said that some of the tools that they recover that are used as part of the abduction and testing, whatever they do, process, are not very friendly and can cause bodily harm. So they pretty much treat us like animals, it sounds like. They're just doing experimentation on us. There's no empathy or whatever. We're just kind of like lab rats, maybe. Potentially, there's also, maybe some AI involved. Obviously, if it's been here for that long, biological life cycle, probably not, you know, forever. So this craft, if it's been here for thousands of years, they're either um, breeding on there and just they have like a skeleton crew, or it is fully automated. And yeah, that's not really clearly laid out in this. Supposedly there's pilots sometimes, so supposedly they have biological remains that they've recovered as well. Um, Someone asked, do you think there are fewer piloted crafts because the population, if any, is declining? His answer, no. The common consensus is that they're just being careful. I've heard recovery of living pilots doesn't go well for either of us. We suspect they piloted a lot of initial craft due to early complications. We also saw more crashes. Someone asked, any bodies recovered show any ranges of aging we can recognize? I wonder if most of the inhabitants are either old or dead at this point, though younger bodies would disprove that, I suppose. His answer, no idea about age, not my specialty, and asking about it would have been a net negative, especially now. Previous higher-ups were getting better about being more open with information since discovery happened quicker. What do passengers look like? Are they bio and or android? He says all bio, so no android or robotic passengers that they're aware of. Out of everything you've ever found regarding UFOs in general, what is your personal favorite? He answers, new engine was deployed with a very large model that I had never seen before. We usually see 3 to 5 gravity producing engines. This one had 7. Favorite object or find? Probably the lab, since we never fully understood how it worked before it was destroyed. Another question makes me wonder whether a meaningful distinction between scientific study and amusement still exists for them, if it ever did. His answer, this was before my time, but they talked about a bus UFO that had more occupants than hardware. Most of the intended purpose appeared to be for physical viewing. I wondered if they ever just wanted to look at the animals. So apparently the skin of the craft in some cases glows orange, and this question kind of addresses it, although it's cut off in the middle. Some of the stuff is disjointed because he went through and answered, so not every single question had answers. So someone asked about the skin of the craft, what he'd observed it looking like. So they're quoting him, not really translucent, but maybe the outer shell was. They definitely had an inner core that wasn't see-through, and he kind of adds to this. Lots of tools they use to produce light. If this was still around the orb, the shell that you may have seen was just the light around the device he calls a hammer. So apparently it's shaped like a hammer. Someone asks, is there more than one construction facility? You mentioned one in the Bermuda Triangle. However, there are a lot of USOs off of the west coast of the Americas as well. Any insights? I suspect there may be, since we only watch the Atlantic, and the UFOs we track normally don't stray far from the home base. Asking about it would have been a bad move. So apparently some of the issues we've had with trying to pilot these craft is apparently there's a biological interface that these beings have with the craft that is somewhat unique. And so apparently their navigation system required that the ET be specifically attuned to the neural network of the craft. He said that this tracks somewhat for him. When we look at the craft, we usually have to force certain things to work. 2 teams come behind his, so that could be dedicated to understanding how the vehicle operates and is controlled. Someone asked about what they look like. He says that they look like the typical grays that you've seen on TV. He says he's seen 2 corpses, and that's what they look like. they don't seem to be overly aggressive. I mean, when he's talking about how they interact with us, I mean, um, if approached at an uncomfortable distance, they flee. When cornered, it doesn't end well. Their tools can do us harm, even just for scientific purposes. We think they just don't care. Someone asked, do you believe we are under their control in some way or sometime in history? He says, possibly, we have no way of knowing. The higher-ups seemed hell-bent on discovering more about them. Someone asked, why do you think that their crafts are crashing? He says, you'd be surprised how many mistakes they make, especially the further back you look. One area they seem to avoid like the plague, we suspect is due to issues with gravity and flight. Before they figured it out, we collected quite a few mishaps there. They've tried to shoot down some, mostly over nuclear incidents, but failed miserably. So this was an area in Mexico, I believe. They go into this later. Someone asked, do you see written symbols in the craft? Yes, usually by doorways and key objects. Written language appears frequently on tools and critical items. So it also reads like their objective is to observe and preserve. The idea was pitched that they are waiting for us to mature or perhaps something bigger to arrive. They don't want us to ruin the planet in the meantime. People are asking, what do you believe the reason for the uptick in sightings? He says, again, my knowledge was cut off 2 years ago. If you mean very recently, my guess would be the Russians and the US having a secret dance among themselves. When nuclear anything gets involved, we see large deployments for large periods of time. Strife seems to be the catalyst. Someone asked what his scariest experience while engaging with the phenomenon. Also what his favorite was, if any. Doors closing on us, mentioned above, made me wish I had brown pants. Still fascinated with the lab we found. It was damaged by accident, and I never really got much time with it. Are you aware of any foreign AI tech that was successfully reverse engineered? Yes, we used to laugh at the Russian and Chinese designs. We stopped laughing at China when they produced an operational but buggy version of their mining equipment. Still stumps most of our engineers. China also lies out its ass, but from what we saw, we deemed it operational and working. Countries listed above have flight-capable craft, just not very good ones. I'm surprised no one has asked about the energy source or internals. So apparently they have particle beam technology that we've reverse engineered, and then lasers are supposedly mostly from maybe reverse engineered craft, if that is if this source is correct. So this applies to what I was talking about earlier. How do UFOs travel in the context of those Tic Tac reports and Bob Lazar's report/video, where they seemingly jump through space-time and light to appear in a new location? Notice how it just phases to a location like staggers, ? He says, this is common when moving at high speed from standstill or slow speed initially. Gravity distorts time and the object inside the field can stagger when traveling. Someone else asked, can the craft detect the presence of a camera and when someone is filming them? He says, not unless the craft is put into a mode to detect a lens, no. If the UFO is hovering still, they won't miss you. You can see a face like you're standing in front of someone a couple miles out. Doesn't look like a camera through their eyes. So he mentions, this is where he mentions that he's got liver cancer. Someone's asking about the materials that the UFOs are made from. He says the answer gets complicated quickly. Short answer is an alloy that we cannot reproduce but only repurpose. The alloy is kind of like a film that fits over the frame of the craft. I mentioned they were built to spec. That's exactly what I mean. The shape is always efficiently designed. The actual frame itself is heavier and composed of more elements. Both of these alloys have a lot of elements we cannot reproduce. One of the main problems when repurposing these alloys is getting them hot enough. They absorb heat very well, and shaping the metal is a tedious process. So, I mean, that's excellent for traveling in our atmosphere because friction produces a ton of heat, and we spend a ton of effort shielding our craft that we go through the upper atmosphere with probably infantile versions of what they're using. Someone asked, can you quickly walk through the process of identifying the contents of a crashed UFO? First team leaves that deals with the occupants and initial discovery. We arrive and meet with an external member of the team who can touch and examine the parts. We are not allowed to. We have never had to cut our way into the UFO. We enter the first order of business is checking the element 115, then leaving the ship together to send it away. We return and look for tools and loose objects that can be extracted. Then we start to strip any specialized components on board, such as sensory equipment or navigation. We leave, and a third and a fourth team arrive, likely to remove the bulk of the craft. Talk more about the mobile construction facility making them. He says it is shaped like an extremely large UFO, but as one mentioned, more of a burger design. Almost never leaves the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, it will sit through hurricanes and only move elsewhere to release or receive a UFO. No visible weapons or cockpit. From the footage, it also does not use any lights, unlike other UFOs. Are there any other things making UFOs? Yes, UFOs arrive and depart Earth, but infrequently. These UFOs are usually quite large. The U.S. has been itching to get its hands on a freighter UFO when inbound or outbound, but the chance has never presented itself. Leadership openly stated securing one would result in a promotion. Someone asked about a triangle UFO. He's saying that he's never seen one. He's saying they're shaped like hammers and burgers. I'm not really sure what that means. I would love to see some pictures. Someone says, the zookeeper analogy is strange. Agree with another here. Most zookeepers like their job and care about the animals. They display high levels of empathy. He says, some of the tools designed for abduction would make you rethink this. A lot of them cause pain or harm. A common tool we find is one that seems to scramble coherent thoughts and make the subject childlike. The best way I can describe its use is like forcing a stroke without actually having one. It makes you delirious but also childlike for a few hours. Someone asks, are these beings capable of empathy? Do they have emotions? I assume they must have learned something from the recovered bodies. He says, never interacted with them, only heard information passed along. They can be upset with previously mentioned topics. They definitely have emotion. So one of the other posts said that they get upset if you threaten war, if you threaten harm to them or to the planet, they get very upset. Someone asked, are they from off-world and true ETs? He says the U.S. and leadership were adamant that they were off-world. Someone asked, why the cloak and dagger? You're asking the same questions leadership struggled with. We're not entirely sure. From everything that I can read, we don't seem like we would be a threat to them directly, but they also don't seem to want to wipe us out. They kind of want to just let us do our thing, but they don't want us to blow ourselves up or the planet. So they seem halfway interested, but not really fully. So it's very weird. Someone says, if the Air Force is confused, like you say, why is it the only agency we know of that is not cooperating with Congress in the AARO? He says, you might get a laugh out of this. The USAF is kept in the dark. We operated above them. A close coworker wondered if even the president knew, namely Trump, because we both thought he would just tell everybody. Someone asks, any idea what they might be waiting for? He says, personally, I think they just want us to grow and become sentient. UFOs arrive all the time and dock with the mobile construction unit. The way I see it, time travel is quite fast. If something was coming to destroy us, they would have arrived already. Someone else says, finding out the truth made them cry and fear for their lives. The offspring will live. He says, I've always suspected my department was under much higher one with more information. I can't speak to any horrors or worries since none were mentioned unless we were pitching theories. As I stated, I think a lot of the U.S. top brass don't even know about it. I heard the phrase, fuck Bill Clinton, thrown around regarding access to information. I'm pretty sure he asked, if I'm not mistaken. And that is correct. Bill Clinton did look into the UFO topic and was told to fuck off. Someone asked, are they human looking or do they resemble something else? Is it something we've written about in US UFO topic or pop culture? They are smaller than humans and look like your typical gray, holes for ears, and they can look at very bright objects without being blinded. I've never seen one move their mouth, but I've also never interacted with one. They're bringing up the Roswell crash. He's saying they were accurate on some things. The theories that are out, the material could have been internal components or small pieces of alloy around the craft. The alloys I saw look different from the pictures. Besides Russian, do any Europors have data or programs researching this as well? He says they're mostly in the dark and probably on the same level as the USAF. So someone asked, did you hear anything related to a U.S. secret space program? Not that I put any credibility into the words of Corey Good, but Gary McKinnon claimed to see files describing off-world personnel and ship names that did not exist. So this references supposedly a faster-than-light off-world fleet that we supposedly have with captain names and ship names, and there's people that believe that there's a station on the Arctic continent that is acting like a galactic air traffic control station for these crafts. So it's how they're directing flight, is supposedly they also have an installation on the Arctic. And there's another video out where someone is claiming to have worked down there as a tradesman and a fireman, so he had full access to the station and he saw stuff. That's a different topic to get into though. What is the mining tool China has supposedly reverse engineered capable of? He says, hard to explain if you haven't seen it. Basically, it extracts the minerals via beam/light directly out of the rock. It has the ability to fill the rock to some degree. China was able to figure out how it works and make a similar version. The problem with the one they built is it only operates for a few seconds before it runs out of power. They still don't understand E115. It also exploded one time and they had to remake it. So this is again talking about the laser. Apparently their version of laser is much more capable. Our laser is the child version. Ours is like a toy. Theirs can do very specialized tasks and is much more powerful, but obviously you need to master E115, and so far we've only been able to create a very unstable version of it that exists for seconds, milliseconds before it degrades. So they're the only ones that can produce a stable version of it. When Bob Lazar initially said that this stuff existed and described it, people said he was crazy, and then I want to say like around 2010-ish, we successfully proved that this substance does in fact exist. Someone's asking about the variety of craft because they're made to spec. He says the best analogy I can give you from variety spec is, think of it like wrapping food in tinfoil on a plate. It's a bad analogy, but you get the idea. Usually they'll always be round or oval, even sometimes pill-shaped. The tinfoil fits the intended function of covering everything without squishing it. So there's a program called MJ12. I forget what MJ stood for, but this was supposedly the older code name for the program much longer ago. And he describes that is kind of thrown around as a joke because it kind of came out. So it was a learning experience for them on how to be more secretive. So someone asked, do they just not like humans and the planet? What's to stop them from just culling us all? He says they could absolutely destroy us if they wanted to. They've started launch sequences before that we suspect were tests on what they are dealing with. My personal view is that they have to stay out of our way but keep us from destroying ourselves. I imagine life elsewhere in the universe often destroys itself. Someone asked, do you think we'll get more answers from the government disclosure, as in them telling us aliens exist, or will the cover-up continue? He says at one point they briefed us about opening up information about the craft, but not the construction unit. Nothing happened for months. Now leadership shows up suddenly back to its BS and secrets again. He's only aware of the grays, so people are asking if there's more species. He says that everything that he knows about is related to that Bermuda factory and the grays, but everything is all compartmentalized, so there is a definite chance that he doesn't know everything or anything. Who knows? Someone asked, I believe they're asking about the element 115. Do we produce it, or is it collected from other craft and just recycled? Because that seems to be the case. He says, we tried to produce it and failed. We produce a shitty variant of it and use it for certain parts we build. Most of what we use for things that cannot be replaced is recycled. Our ability to rehash their shit has slowly gotten better. Is there tech that was gained from these craft that the military widely uses today, or civilians for that matter? He says a lot of your stealth aircraft sport smoother design for one. Learning to track them also helped with targeting software. Laser technology comes to mind since it's a crippled version of what they use. Most of what I saw was way above us. It's hard to put the hammers and how you see through them into words. It's not like a drone camera and it's not a clear image. Someone asked, can you clarify? They have distinct fascination with radiation. Remember how I mentioned they don't go far from home base? When Fukushima happened, the construction facility deployed multiple UFOs to that location over multiple weeks. They were also very interested in Ebola at one point. We can't confirm abductions since the local population didn't have reporting for that. Does the moon hold anything of interest? He says, not that I'm aware of. We know that UFOs entering and exiting the atmosphere do not go toward any known planet often. Someone's asking, are the flying orbs just scouts, ? Research drones, ? He says, do you mean the orbs in the sky, or do you mean the landed craft deploying them? I've mentioned previously that there are tools that are shaped like hammers. They emit extremely bright light and are often used as some sort of drone or scout. They are able to view almost 360 degrees and detect anything from minerals to bio. If a human encounters them, they are usually deployed to watch and figure out when to wrap it up and leave. Do you think they interfere with our general science or investigations? Yes, they do not want to be studied. They also do not collect downcraft or occupants. It seems to be an oh well approach. E115 is the exception. They don't seem to enjoy the idea of us toying with it. Do they seem to learn where the craft get caught? He says yes, there's an area they actively avoid in Mexico, among others. They also deploy more drones than piloted craft unless absolutely necessary. Is the technology they produce increasing rapidly or lags for years? I wouldn't say it's an increase in technology. It's more like adjustment / better understanding of how to operate. It's one reason we thought about the 100 years for the first deployment of the construction facility. If it were here for years, we would have seen the majority of all adjustments made. Does the factory produce any signature? Heat, electromagnetic? How do you track it? Both. We rely mostly on detecting the gravity it produces. It normally doesn't produce heat outright. When it does, we believe it's in the process of construction, since a small heat buildup can be detected when a craft returns or exits. This happens when it's being broken back down in the parts or assembled. We can only detect these heat signatures when it's near the surface of the ocean, so sometimes a UFO will pop out on us. So this doesn't make sense to me because gravity, it's difficult to detect gravity over distance. So I don't know what type of sensor. Long-range gravitational sensing, as far as I'm aware of, is not a thing. We're able to detect it through sight. We can see gravitational lensing in space, so you can see the light bending when it's passing near something that has a lot of gravity. But down in the ocean, there's no visibility. So I don't know how, if this claim is true, I don't know how they are detecting its gravitational signature. That's a very weird concept, but what do I know? I'm just a monkey. I don't know anything. They're asking about other countries, what they know. It's pretty much just the big three, from what he says. It's just Russia, China, and us. Some governments still don't know they exist, or they aren't sure. The MJ-12 was something majestic. Someone asked how many craft we have. He says we've got at least 18 different models. Someone asked, is Lockheed Martin involved in reverse engineering? He sarcastically says they're a great company, aren't they? ? Which leads me to believe that that's a yes. Someone asked, can you describe some of the other tools found on wrecked craft? He says we've found things as simple as basic tools akin to tweezers to the lab. One that sticks out to me was an oval-shaped silver ball that would change colors based on how close it was to a source of energy. Another would be a sheet of metal that allowed you to view bones by placing it near someone's hand. 2, can you describe any of the injuries or deaths that occurred involving alien craft? He says, I've witnessed no deaths or injuries aside from corpses. I never got to see one. We had an abductee, but they weren't sure at the time if she died on impact. We've been told that they use us for food as a question. He says, never found any food on board. Could be because they remove it before we arrive. Someone asked, my question is, are they going to invade humanity in mass? He says, I think wiping us out would be easy for them. No idea what they're waiting for. Someone asks, what do you know about element 115? He says what I described above has its own field of gravity, but is weak on its own. So the Bob Lazar explanation is this element, the drive system of the craft was described by Bob as a ball. It was placed on a table, and then his lab partner challenged him to try to touch it. What he claimed was the closer that he tried to push his hand to the orb, the more resistance he felt. So anti-gravity field that is then placed into a craft that has cones that supposedly amplify its force. So you take a ball that only has short-term effect, you put it inside the craft, and then it gets magnified, and that anti-gravity force is used to make the craft levitate, So apparently these craft basically just hover there. He said that you could push them and they'd kind of drift. I don't know. It lines up with the stuff that I've heard in this vein before, but that doesn't mean anything because none of it's substantiated. Someone asked, how would you go about interacting with it? He says you can hold it. Removal is done very gently, though. Someone says, where's the element 115? Typically found within a down craft. He says compartment near the engine, not far from the center of the craft. If the craft has a frame with a centerpiece, we have to extract it from the angle. Someone asked, how can the element be anti-grav? It would fly to space and you couldn't find it. Just no, that's terrible. It's not how it works at all. He says all the craft that he's seen are all powered by 115 so far. Someone asked, what's up with the anal probes? Good question. Now we're getting to the meat of it. Why are they so obsessed with our butts? Maybe because it's the easiest way to access. I mean, I can't think of a better place to go in, you know? I think that's what it's there for. It's a port for alien inspections. We think it's for bowel movements, but that's not the intelligent design. That's the accidental part. Someone asked about female aliens. He says the ones with or without the probes. There's something down further that says that they've never seen a female. I don't think. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about the Zimbabwe incident where a craft of Greys landed in Rua, Zimbabwe. But supposedly a whole group of school children witnessed this event. Super interesting on its own. He says it doesn't seem likely, but here's the kicker. Based on what they described, he believes them minus a few things they said. He doesn't extrapolate any more. Someone asked, do you know of any direct contact of agents by them? Never heard of direct contact started from them. Their end, that doesn't mean we haven't. Someone asked, I'll never understand this. The current implementation of compartmentalization and complete secrecy is a fool's errand. He says, one of the minor reasons I'm here, we agree. I do think the initial panic would be really bad, especially for religious community. But if we're going to figure this out, scientific process requires transparency, communication, study by more than one group to try to figure this out. And this is what I mean. Competition is always going to produce less than what we could do together. So it's too bad that humanity cannot figure out how to kind of come together, where it's all still very competitive and, us versus them. It's kind of, I guess, the way that we're going to be doomed to be forever. Before the XX century, have they influenced human culture in any way at all? He says the U.S. wasn't sure since we don't have information to use. The Sumerian stories were a common topic when talking about the at least 100 years theory. I think it's odd young civilizations knew things they were not supposed to know that far back. I also find that very weird, and I think anyone who's watched Ancient Aliens would probably agree. Someone says, you've mentioned that they get upset at the mention of war and conflict. He says extremely upset if the threat is believable, like war with countries. Someone says, so we've communicated with them. How? How many times? He says, anytime the topic came up, there was no special mention of communication types, so I assume orally quite a few times. Someone mentions that he just described Atlantis because this huge craft is able to come to the surface and would appear to be a very technologically advanced island. But he says the U.S. didn't agree this was the case because they didn't have much faith pooled into one Greek and rare mentioned. So he claims that one of the tools that they use, allegedly certain Army personnel who had close encounters with UAPs would have sudden shifts in emotion or would complain of headaches. A few of these people died shortly after coming into contact. When examined, doctors would find evidence of radiation targeting specific areas of the brain. Gary Nolan thinks that this is what Havana syndrome actually is/was. Someone asked, some tools used for abduction cause confusion and some calm, etc. Some leave radiation, but nothing crazy. So he says, I've seen a few true believers theorize that if aliens understood human physiology far better than we do, they could influence the brain with some sort of technology we don't even really understand. Of course, this would have far-reaching implications about the human brain/mind control. He says, I can't speak to that area much. I said previously the tools aren't friendly ones. They would serve a better purpose wrangling mentally ill people than ensuring a patient is content. Has there been any discussion internally about the origins of these beings and or the mobile facility? Only amongst ourselves, since we see the direction they enter/leave the solar system briefly. The higher-ups definitely know it just wasn't part of what we did. Once it leaves the planet, we ignore it. The U.S. believes on one extreme or the other. It arrived around 100 years ago and started the process of discovery and construction, versus it's been here since long ago. And oh hey, there is a ton of civilizations talking about this for ages. Someone asked, came here from space long ago? The theory is that yes, it came from space. Someone says, I'm guessing that the biology department has little to no communication with yours. He says, I wouldn't know they exist if I didn't see them. We get basic rundowns from higher ups. We send information forward. It is always passed along. Any idea what happens to the ships/planes/people that the construction unit disappears? He says they're destroyed near instantly with no suffering. Someone asked about the whether he can draw some symbols, obviously trying to understand if this is similar to any human symbols or language that we're used to. Someone asked, does the language look linear like ours? He says yes, but there are soft corners and things like dots, but not many. So someone's asking if they seem to be hive-minded, if the construction unit is controlling the UFOs. He doesn't have a good answer. He says that the research organization wondered the same thing. Someone asked, what about space-time manipulation? Any hunches there? Never heard any ideas pitched other than the engine/gravity causing time dilation. Someone says, now completely destroyed UFO could be reassembled. Who acts like that? It's like ripping off the RAM of a PC, damaging the motherboard, cutting the wires, pee on the CPU before throwing it in the river. Next team investigates the damage, sends the PC to the next team, and they say, yeah, hard to re-engineer. He says, the way these are constructed, you cannot take an existing but damaged craft and just add on spare parts. Close it up and call it good. Human, quote-unquote, repairs only go so far on existing craft. Instead, we have a much shittier iteration of what they build. Some parts are not reused. They are just materials for testing or research. Once again, could be that I explained the process too poorly. We didn't reassemble them, quite literally bum parts and try to make our own, and some parts of the craft we have to be human-made substitutions. The mechanism for piloting is one. Someone asked if they respond to our rocket operations, specifically SpaceX operations, and he said yes, they respond to rocketry. So he claims that the inside of the craft is cramped and hard to stand fully upright. He's only 5'8". He said there's almost never a storage facility unless it's dedicated to something for the craft. There's always a method of interacting with the craft. Tools are not placed freely around the craft and have dedicated placement. So supposedly Space Force, according to what the internal memos were, is Space Force's discovery for internal use. They're studying this, and then they provide disinformation to the public. So you can never tell when information comes out whether it's complete BS and it's just a psyop that's trying to throw us off, or what their motivation is. I mean, you hope that this is being done genuinely, but you don't know. People again brought up, the fact that people with security clearances don't come on 4chan to spill the beans. He just reiterates that he's got pretty advanced liver cancer, supposedly, so that's why he doesn't give a shit. He says crop circles are not relevant. That's another debate. People have been talking about that recently too. Apparently they don't study animals, from what I'm reading. Someone asked whether his liver cancer has to do with his work, and he says that he doesn't know for sure, obviously. MJ12 gets brought up again. He says the term is more of a history lesson than anything now. Someone asked, why do you think cloaking technology isn't employed by UAPs? It shouldn't be that difficult to bend light. He says that he wish he knew. He could show you one of the images from their training. Sometimes we get lucky and find very odd variations of UFOs. Same setup as usual, but with interesting additions. Someone asked if they know the original origin for these crafts. We don't have any idea. Also, no craft that he knows of that's proven to be ancient as far as trying to understand when it was created. He says plasma physics is one of the things that that we got from reverse engineering the technology. He says if there is full disclosure, pay attention to developments in plasma physics and laser tech, because they're probably holding a bunch of stuff back.